You know, I love some TV ratings talk just about as much as I love college football talk. And I've got the right guy here to break down the numbers, answer the questions, and I will certainly have a few or many. Tony Altamore, consultant and strategist here, friend of the network, of course. And lock it in here at the Voice of College Football for the next several minutes because we are going to break down television ratings for the 2022 and 2023 college football seasons with the difficult to find SEC and ACC network numbers included. So some of you will say, Mark, you did a series on college football ratings for 2023. I did, but had to add the disclaimer. I've got no numbers for the ACC and the SEC networks and the CW as well. Those numbers I did have available to me, but Tony's going to have so much more and much easier to break down visually. So, Tony, we appreciate you being here, sir.
Oh, thanks. It's good to be here. I love the chance to chat with folks about this because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the SEC network and ACC network. And they certainly do a great job of providing games for fans to see that, if we go back 10, 15 years ago, weren't on TV or you couldn't watch or, you had to go to a random bar with a satellite to watch. And now they're in people's homes and available. And that's awesome. They don't score as well as the regular networks, but I got the chance to take a look at their data. Was provided by a contact with numbers that they use for advertising. And so it's from ComScore. It's not from Nielsen because Nielsen doesn't rate them, but it gives us an estimate of what the viewership is for each game. So in the charts we're going to look at, we've got 2 years of data. We've got last year and this year, or I guess the last 2 years because this year's passed. But each line in this is one game. So this is comparing here. We've got the Big Ten network, the SEC network, and the ACC network. And you can see the Big Ten network does really pretty well. SEC network, and again, the Big Ten network is measured by Nielsen, so it's little different measurements. There's going to be angry comments, but again, this is the best data that we can actually get. And you can see, the SEC network also does very well. The ACC network not quite as well, but still certainly puts those games in the homes. And one of the things that we talked about when we talked about viewership last time, and this we'll look at here at the ACC, is the impact that channel has. So the thing that people have a big misunderstanding. They think that viewership is driven by fans, like fans with heart, but it's not. It's driven by your Uncle Gary and your Aunt Lulu who can't find the remote and just watches whatever's on CBS, whether it's Blue Bloods or the SEC. It's viewership isn't really about random Americans watching the game. It's a TV product. It's not just for fans. And so as a result, the bigger the network is, the bigger the audience is. And so, of course, the networks, then they want to put the biggest game that attracts the most people in their biggest spot. So it's a little bit of chicken or the egg, but you really have the channel driving the audience. And you can see that here. So if you take a look at the ACC, again, from left to right, you're looking at ABC games for the ACC, 10.5 million, 5 million, and, the lowest ones there, 1.5 and 2 million. Versus you can see how that drops off, as you go down. And of course, NBC, those are the Notre Dame games, Fox, a couple of, random non-conference and stuff. ACC has a lot of ESPN. And you start to see, look at how much smaller, for example, ESPN2 is than ESPN. And then look at how much smaller the ACC network viewership is compared to any of those others. So
Tony, one thing that stands out is that regardless of the network, there are 2 or 3 or 4 games that squash everything else, that there's a discernible drop off after. And we could all, people that really are into what networks carry what teams, could guess which games we're looking at with these various networks. But look at ABC, a couple enormous games, and then it drops considerably. And that's in line with every other network, especially the larger networks.
They are. And I mean, for example, that one huge green line, I think the two top ones are probably Ohio State and Notre Dame.
Notre Dame.
If I recall. I mean, I'd have to check.
I think the NBC at over 10 million is Ohio State, Notre Dame.
Yeah, and probably one of the ABCs is the year before when it was at Ohio State.
Exactly. It is. Yes. That's right.
would be
I
my
was forgetting
guess.
about the year prior. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have probably one of each, and I don't know, one of the others might be Clemson, Notre Dame, or something like that. There's a couple of those those really big numbers drive it. But you see, I mean, it's not just for the ACC. So if you take a look at the SEC, again, you see the same thing. Those big SEC games, and the SEC has a lot of big games, but those big SEC games are on those big networks. They're on CBS. Now, one difference is the SEC. So when we actually, let me pause real quick. When we did the regression analysis that we've talked about here on the channel before, and we found that when you're really comparing and predicting viewership, there's sort of three groupings of channels. There's the OTA networks, the big four networks. Then there's main ESPN. Then there's the extraneous cable channels. The SEC night games on ESPN nowadays, those like LSU at like 8 p.m. do really well. And you see that some of those games are actually beating some of the big network games. There's, a few of them that do really well, which is different than what you see for other, regular ESPN games. When we look at like the ACC or the Big Ten, here you see the Big Ten. Of course, remember, the Big Ten doesn't put its big games on ESPN anymore. So you see the Big Ten games are all like, if you look at Fox, we actually have to put Axis cuts in that, right? For Michigan and Notre Dame, particularly. So you see it goes from 10 million to 17 million. So yeah, it would just keep going, two more screens above what we could see there for the Big Ten. But if you take a look at the Big Ten network, I mean, the Big Ten network does surprisingly well. People watch games on there. So you see, I mean, it outdoes ESPN2 and FS1.
Yeah, the last two Ohio State-Michigan games hit 17.1 and 19.1 million on Fox.
Okay, yeah, those are those two lines then. But I mean, there's other, 10 million, 9. So, I mean, there are a lot of those games that, the Big Ten has that are, big games people watch. I think we see those same two lines here that are the Ohio State Notre Dame games, the tall green one and the tall black one. But you really start to see what I think that the conference networks do is the conference networks are sort of the core fans, right? So if we look here at, these games, look at those huge CBS numbers. Those aren't, core Mississippi State fans. Those are all Americans watching the games. You look at the SEC network, those are your core fans are going to be on those channels. And I think that kind of gives you almost like a base, like, what is the minimum number of people that will watch your game? And it's the people that will go to the SEC network or the ACC network or the Pac-12 network.
Hey, Tony, if you would lay the groundwork for everyone on a metric that you've told me a few times in regards to, I think it's like an 87% figure that is determined by three things.
Yeah. So when we did the regression analysis on the TV data last year, I found actually, we were trying to do this for some realignment stuff, and it turned out to sort of debunk what I was actually expecting to find from realignment stuff. And that was that three factors determine 88% of the viewership predictability. So we have a formula that can just predict viewership to, explain 88% of the variation in viewership, R squared for, statistics dorks out there, with three factors. The first one is the grouping of the channel. So, what kind of channel is it on? The second one, and I mean, guys, and this sounds like really stupid and easy, but it's actually fascinating to sort of see how it played out with the statistics. The second one is the combined ranks of the teams. And the third one is the historical success of both teams. And believe it or not, what the statistics program told me the best predictor for that is the Winsipedia composite rankings. So if you guys know like how Winsipedia ranks them all sort of like a blue blood index, that has huge predictability in terms of who people watch on TV. And so if we look at the Big Ten, for example, those huge Michigan Ohio State games, for example, well, they're number 1 versus number 2 versus number 3, whatever they were. They're on the huge channel, and they're 2 of the bluest blue blood programs of all. So they just have huge numbers, and you sort of see the same thing. Whether that same thing with Texas and Oklahoma, all that. So that's where really viewership is not about fans. It's about the game. It's about the game that's being presented to people, how relevant it is, what channel it is, and how big the brands are.
Now, to confirm that, and I'm not in any way doubting that whatsoever, but to confirm it would be impossible. But the ultimate experiment, the media experiment that would be fun to play out would be, okay, we're going to throw the Ohio State Notre Dame game on ESPNU, and we're going to, we're just going to completely flip it and see if people will find those games, which of course, all of these people watching that watch the Voice of College Football that are hardcore college football fans
would absolutely find
the games.
Well, and that
the Aunt Sally of the world will watch the Houston Tulane game if it's on Fox at noon.
It's true, and she'll be like, "My cousin Teddy lived in Houston. I'm gonna watch that game." You guys laugh, but remember, it's about your random neighbor across the street. People tell me they'll say things like, "Well, the reason people watch late games is because because of gambling. They've got a double, triple parlay." And I'm like, no, the late games are driven by your uncle who coughs all night. There's 200 uncles coughing for every person with a double, triple parlay in the late game. And it's about sort of mass audiences. And so that's really kind of what drives it. And again, like you mentioned, Mark, chicken or the egg, right? They're not putting Michigan Ohio State on ESPNU. They're putting the big games with those, they're going to draw those big audiences on those big channels. So it is some chicken or the egg. But you get, and you do a great example of that though, about the importance of channel. Channel was the number one thing. Channel actually explains 65% of the viewership variance alone. But I'll give you an example. Oregon State, San Jose State, on a Sunday, or what was that, week 0 or whatever, pulled 4 million people. If you put that game in the middle of the season on a regular day, it would probably have 800,000. But, you put it on CBS and you put it on a Sunday and it's the only game on, and, people watch Brent Brennan's San Jose State team take on the Beavs.
Tony, this past season, we ran into a phenomena that we have not seen since, I don't know what it could be compared to, and that's Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. The Colorado impact was incredible, where a 4-8 football team, of course, got off to a hot start, so that helped. But just the 60 Minutes interview and Deion Sanders being who he is, and just that story, that narrative just ran like a locomotive for 4 or 5 weeks. And if you would have told any of us that Colorado and Colorado State would draw 10 million plus, and the game's on ESPN, which is a good network, but
it's 2 in the morning.
Exactly, where they kick off at 10:30 at night Eastern time. That was insane.
And let me show you something.
Yeah, the TCU game, big number. The Nebraska game that they had, the USC game at home. Then they started to hit that snag, but they still carry throughout the season, but not to that extent. But that September run from Colorado was crazy.
So let me show you this. Now, this is kind of a complicated chart. I don't want to spend too much time on it. This is last year. I'm sorry, it's not last. This is a few years. This is 2016 to 23 averages. But it's looking, the vertical is how well your team did winning. And the horizontal is your total TV viewers. And it's on a logarithmic scale. That's why you'll notice you see the huge correlation. Like we said, people watch winning teams. Up in the upper right corner is Alabama and Ohio State and Michigan, right? And Georgia. Those are the four in the corner. Now, what's interesting is as you get out from that middle line, that middle line there sort of shows like what you'd expect. But as you get out from that middle line, as you go, to the left, that says that you're better at winning than attracting TV viewers. So actually, you'll see like Central Florida is out there. SMU's out there. Wake Forest is out there. Utah's out there. Kansas State. They're actually, based on how much they're winning, you would think more people watch them. And then to the right says that you actually do better attracting viewers than winning, which has Notre Dame, Texas, USC, Michigan State, Nebraska, Arkansas. Well, we're picking on my beloved Trojans here, but it's true. We do better. We pull sometimes better people than we won, than our defense earned. But then there's only one like real outlier. Look at Colorado right there. That's the one dot on the bottom that's all alone as an abysmal team that people watch.
And that number is basically carried by what happened last season.
Well, but you know what? Actually, Mark, believe it or not, Colorado's brand, even before Coach Prime, like given how bad they were, people still watched them. They still put a lot of people in Folsom Field. I mean, Stanford can't sell out Stanford Stadium when Christian McCaffrey's running the ball. And 1 in 9 Colorados fill in Folsom Field. It's crazy.
What else is going to be interesting, both to try to project going forward and see how it plays out, and then also just started to take effect last year, was, of course, you bring up UCF. Well, UCF in the American Conference was one of the heavy hitters, but playing Oklahoma State and some decent draws in the Big 12, I'm sure pulled better numbers last year, playing more games regularly on ESPN, ABC, etc. And then who draws extremely poorly, but now have jumped into the ACC is my tracking the last few years. Yes, SMU. You're talking like numbers 50, 80,000, but they're on ESPNU. They play a lot of ESPN2 games.
Yep.
And they should do better coming up with better matchups as well.
Oh, I think so. And also they're really, they're on fire with their recruiting. I mean, their teams are getting better. And I think, you see this, I think, with UCF too. That there's an excitement and an energy, and that fuels the whole program to really rise up. And I think they're going to have a lot of success. I think they're going to beat some people. I will say they're not going to have quite as much. They think they're going straight back to like Eric Dickerson. And I think that they may have not quite that ascension, but I think they're going to have a really good season. And I think people are going to have fun watching them. And I think they're going to really build it back up. And I think that's I hope is going to be a good success story overall. I'll tell you another one. And I'm going to have to take a shower with bleach after saying this.
Oh boy.
But I think UCLA in the Big Ten. I'm sorry, I cut out for a sec. The gods were striking me down for saying that, Mark. I was giving UCLA some credit. And then my internet was like, no, don't do that. But I think that they're going to see more excitement being in the Big Ten. And, playing Wisconsin rather than playing Wazoo.
Poor Rutgers.
But we'll see on them.
And here's the deal with Rutgers, Tony. And I haven't done this as long as you have. I've just looked at the last 3 years, and I have not been as systematic as you have. But I generally know what I'm doing and have looked at all the games and so forth. But again, have not had the ACC and the SEC network to look at. But with Rutgers, what's funny is they will play almost an entire Big Ten season on the Big Ten network. Almost.
The whole season.
Now,
almost
the entire season.
They get like one Michigan game on ABC.
Exactly. So last year, I know that they played Ohio State on NBC or CBS. I forget which. I think it was a CBS game. So one of two things will happen. Either one of the big networks, when Rutgers is playing Ohio State or Michigan, will say, okay, we'll take that game this week. Or there's an obligation for where the Big Ten network does get Ohio State and Michigan and everyone else, but it really just plays into the Ohio State Michigan situation where they get, there you go. We got a Rutgers fan. Beautiful. Keep Choppins here.
Nice.
Where the Big Ten does get Ohio State and Michigan for one conference game, and it's typically Rutgers, and will turn out to be the highest rated game on the Big Ten network for that year. But it's just funny that they own the Big Ten network.
Well, and I mean, when they have those games, they pull good numbers to the Big Ten network. I mean, there's games with 2 million people watching those games. They do pretty well. Some of those Big Ten network games. No, you're right. Sorry, go ahead.
Tony, here's another factor going forward, and Big 12 fans are not going to want to hear this. Based on my review of, yes, well, Oklahoma and Texas, they were one of the two teams playing in 14 of the top 17 rated conference games in the Big 12. And they're gone.
So I've done numbers. I don't know if you've seen, I've done numbers that pull out Oklahoma and Texas from the Big 12 viewership. And it is brutal. It hurts the Big 12 worse. Again, this is predictable, right? So this is looking back and playing with data. It's the future. We don't know what the future will bring, but the data would imply that losing Texas and Oklahoma is more painful to the Big 12 than losing Clemson and Florida State would be to the ACC.
Yeah. And our buddy Joey Foster in the chat says, here we go. Time to put down the Big 12. Joey?
We're talking Texas is a beast.
Yes. If we say anything inaccurate, let us know. But we're just spitting facts.
But one thing I will say, though, is that will, and this is a good thing for the rest of the Big 12, I think anyway, is it will give more oxygen to the other Big 12 teams. Not having Texas there will mean people let's pick. We got Joey in the chat. Let's pick on WVU. People watch West Virginia. And so I think not having Texas means that the West Virginia Texas Tech game has more chance of being watched than the Texas Kansas game because, there's no Texas. So, I think that in a good way, that may give some oxygen to Big 12 teams that will be really good for their viewership too. Not as good as them playing Texas, but better for them than Texas playing somebody else. So that's my, but you're right. It is going to be a brutal piece, and I'll tell you also that something that also isn't factored in. So you guys know we've done like fan base analyses and pull data scraped old studies and stuff like that where we can pull it down by county and zip code and all that. I think that for the the state of Texas fans for the Big 12, the relevance of losing and also, by the way, Oklahoma is like a huge team in Dallas, right? Because it's just up there, if you know the geography. Losing now Texas A&M, and Oklahoma to the SEC. The state of Texas is SEC country. And my Texas Tech friends are not happy about that. But I think it's going to be an issue for them. Because it is. They're going to focus. They're going to be, instead of talking about Oklahoma State and K-State and Texas Tech, they're going to be talking about Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and Florida when Texas A&M and Oklahoma are playing them. Somebody was just asking impact of Florida State in the Big Ten or SEC. Florida State has really good viewership, like really good. Florida State would be great in those, but I'll tell you the thing that worries me about continued growth of the Big Ten and the SEC is that, just like we said about how losing Texas and Oklahoma will give some oxygen to the rest of the Big 12, cramming more teams in the Big Ten and SEC chokes out the oxygen for a lot of the Big Ten. Florida State will take opportunities away from, viewership and exposure opportunities away from Wisconsin and Michigan State and Minnesota and Iowa because they'll be showing Florida State. I mean, if they're in there. So that's something that would worry me. I will also say, I don't know if you guys have seen, I did some charts on this and they made a lot of people really angry. But there's a lot of talk about North Carolina and Virginia. And I love North Carolina and I love Virginia, and I have been taught on both of their campuses. They're awesome. I have great friends. I am go Hoos and, go Tar Heels. But their TV metrics and their on-field metrics are almost identical to two other schools. And those two other schools are Stanford and Cal. So,
meaning North Carolina is Stanford and Virginia is Cal?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
As far as on-field success, as far as SP+, as far as wins, as far as TV audience, games picked by networks. Actually, Stanford's better than either of them, but close enough. The two are very similar to Stanford and Cal to North Carolina and Virginia. Markets, everything. So, I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you what Fox eventually will say we'll pay for and what they won't, or what ESPN would pay for or won't. But, any valuation exercise you do on Carolina and Virginia, your two best comps are Stanford and Cal, and we saw how their valuation worked.
So the Big 12, of course, a year ago made a survival play once they lost Oklahoma and Texas by going and grabbing the best of the group of five. Now, here we are an offseason later, they go grab 4 from the Pac-12. Now, in hindsight, had they known, I wonder if those 4 from the group of 5, Houston, UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, devalued at all their conference, and had they known that they would be able to. So I'm not second guessing in any way. They didn't know. I actually posted a video before they made that move and said, these are the 4 schools you should go get.
We did very similar things at the time.
I wonder if they would have been stronger at, what are the numbers? 12 teams without those 4?
So I don't think they would have gotten what they got. If we want to look at revisionist history, and I say this in a support of the Big 12. One thing that I will say is if we go back to 2021, that was a beleaguered and beaten down conference. I mean, and the YouTubers that I watched were literally in tears on their YouTube channels about what was going on, like actual tears. What I think that those 4 group of 5 teams did is pump life into that conference. And it's hard to quantify that with metrics. And again, when we look at metrics, we can say with metrics, yes, it absolutely devalued the conference. It financially devalued the conference. It, on-field strength devalued the conference, but it pumped a life into the conference that invigorated and re-energized the Big 12, I think. And I think that you can't put a value on that, and that they needed that. And if they didn't have that reinvigorization, they absolutely would not have landed those Pac-12 teams. And what happened in 2022 would not, I mean, the Pac-12 would have probably taken a couple of them, to make up for Oregon and Washington. So again, sort of it's hard to do that revisionist history, but I say this as a compliment to the Big 12. I think that those 4 teams pumped life into them. I will also tell you, and I say this as someone who loved the Pac-10, who came from the Pac-12. Arizona and ASU and Colorado are bad. And so they are bigger brands, and they have more brand value, and they have more TV value. But like Central Florida and Brigham Young and Cincinnati they might be better teams. Yeah. And so, I don't, we can go back to that, winning one. Look at UCF out there. I mean, Utah's great. So we're not talking about Utah. Utah is a phenomenal addition to the Big 12. But are you better off with Colorado, or are you better off with Central Florida? Look at the chart. It tells us our answer. Central Florida is a good team. Colorado is a bad team. And I understand Rick George was just criticizing the transfer portal, their AD. So, what's upside down about the world right now? But yeah, I mean, you take a look on that chart. Houston's been good. Cincinnati's been good. They're better. Those teams have been better recently than Arizona and Arizona State and Colorado. So, again, we can joke about UCF. And again, people, you see on this chart, UCF does better at winning than attracting viewers. Colorado is better at attracting viewers than winning.
So, Tony, if we go back, let's say about 4 decades, I think this really started to accelerate in the 1980s, where people started moving south and moving west. And this, based on what we know about TV viewership, has not really impacted the Big Ten as much as you would have thought. There was talk 15, 20 years ago forecasting the demise of the Big Ten to a certain extent in being able to stay relevant.
By the way, we have the great Cole Adams with us, who needs a shout out.
There we go.
Go Cole. Sorry, go on. Here.
But just in regards to the Big Ten being able to keep up and keep its place in college football because of the population shift, but that's not reflected in these TV numbers.
Well, I mean, you think about it, like let's pick on Alabama, right? No better team than Alabama. Alabama is not a particularly populous state. It's not a wealthy state. It's not a good market, but it's the best team in college football. Probably the best team in the history of college football. So, I think that you do kind of get to a question about, do markets matter or do teams? And I mean, you can say both, right? I mean, because we can pick on like USC, but like, would you rather have Auburn or would you rather have Rutgers? And I mean, Auburn is in a small town in a small, poor state, and Rutgers is in the biggest city in North America. Or no, Mexico City's probably bigger. Biggest city in the United States, certainly. You can see the skyline of Manhattan from Rutgers. But are you better off with Alabama or Rutgers? You're better off with Alabama. So, one of the things that I do think we see a little bit, and this is just me sort of, looking at the data, is that, winning and brands matter. Location, the location doesn't matter as much. I mean, heck, let's pick on a school in in a pretty decrepit town in the backwoods of Northwest Indiana. And Notre Dame is the number 1 brand in all of college football. And it's not because it's in Northwest Indiana, it's because it's a nationwide brand. And so I think that you do get, you get these nationwide brands, and they really matter a lot. And so I think if you have a school that has that kind of brand, it gives you a lot of power. People will watch it. Look at Colorado. People watch Colorado. They think about, Coach Mack and Sal after he died, and the holding penalty with Rocket Ishmael. People think about that with Colorado, even though the Colorado we know today is a 1-8 in conference.
We appreciate y'all being here. The voice of college
it's a
football.
hard thing.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, everyone. Tony Altamore, consultant strategist. We appreciate Tony being here. Tony and I are going to get together a number of times throughout the summer because we still want to address a number of programs and hear from Tony's deep dive on a number of programs that we have yet to get to and see the
We've got some
full.
cool new stuff for those too.
Nice. It's the full scope. It's the academics, it's the history, and it's the media presence, and it's the football winning, it's the athletics prowess across the board as well. Great stuff.
Cool. Well, thank you guys.
Tony, do you want to take a few calls?
Sure.
So I'm going to drop the link in the chat if anyone has any questions concerning TV ratings or any comments.
And yeah, it was interesting for me to see this. So, again, the TV data is not exact, right? Because it's ComScore versus Nielsen, but it was interesting to sort of see, kind of how the Big Ten network does, how the SEC network does, and how the ACC network does. But I would say to folks, one of the great things about these networks, because first of all, for fans, it's about seeing your team. It's not a lot of fans get all excited about, good news for TV networks that they don't really need to. If you don't get the money from the ads, then the viewership really doesn't matter for you. So it's about seeing the team. And I lived overseas for a while, and it was always hard to see the team. So I was really lucky because my beloved alma mater was #1 in the country for most of the time. So we would be I could see it on the military channels, believe it or not. We were always on the Armed Forces Network. But, if we weren't, it was hard because you couldn't see the game. And the great thing today about these conference networks for fans, I think, is, they let you see the game. So people complain. They're like, oh, we're on the ACC network. Nobody's going to watch us. Well, you get to watch your team. And that, I think, is awesome and powerful. And that's my personal opinion.
One thing to look at here, Tony, and of course, I promoted this as a comparison between the SEC network and the ACC network, and we see them there side by side. And if you look at that top ACC game, you're looking at roughly 400,000 viewers. And I'm going to take an estimate that there are roughly 15 to 20 SEC games that outrank the viewership of the #1 ACC game. Let's also keep in mind, as we've discussed here in breaking down the ratings, and certainly with what's going on with Florida State and Clemson versus the ACC, is that the SEC network was established in 2014, and ESPN was extremely successful in launching the SEC network. It was able to get distribution that was roughly the same as ESPN2 and only about 1 million to 2 million subscribers less than ESPN right out of the gate for the SEC network. We also know that the SEC is more popular in football than the ACC. And then on top of that, for whatever reason, I was there. I was not heavily involved, but when the ACC network launched, I don't know if ESPN took less attention to the project, just figured, hey, we killed it with the SEC. This is easy. We've got the formula. We can do it. But they just did not do a great sales job in pushing the ACC on cable companies. And I don't remember what the initial subscriber rate was, but it's still just a large chasm between the two. And that's reflected there. I think it's reflected because the SEC is more popular in football than the ACC, but even more so by just the distribution numbers of the SEC network over the ACC.
Well, and let's remember, too, what we don't have in this chart is the Pac-12 network, which I believe is probably worse than the ACC network.
Probably.
So there's another network that we don't have any data on because apparently those numbers are atrocious. I haven't seen them, so I can't speak for them, but I'm told that they are bad. The thing about the Pac-12 network, they always had a great product, right? I mean, like Yogi and Ashley. There's literally nobody better than Yogi and Ashley. They should be on main ESPN, but they're on the Pac-12 network. But they just, again, distribution was awful. People don't watch it. The games weren't as good that are on it. The thing with the SEC too is, remember, you have these sort of rabid fans. The ACC's got more than a few sort of Vandies, right? They got Boston College, they got Wake Forest, they've got Duke. Some that just don't sort of draw those same rabid fans as like Mississippi State. Like, people love Mississippi State. Those cowbell people love the Bulldogs, even when they're bad. And so people will find a way. More people, I think, will find a way to watch Mississippi State than will find a way to watch Wake Forest. And part of that goes down to the idea of like the state flagship schools and the land grant schools and the sense of place, I think, that they conjure up in the fans. Like, if you're from Mississippi, you feel a tie usually to Ole Miss or Mississippi State. If you're from Michigan, you feel a tie to, U of M or Michigan State. And, people don't have that same love for, people aren't like, oh my gosh, I'm from Massachusetts, I love a very snooty, preppy Jesuit school of BC. Like, you don't have that. They don't have the sense of place. And so, the SEC has that as an advantage, and that's been part of their strategy and expansion. The SEC, when they say they want to expand, they want big brand, flagship, good schools. Remember, every single school the SEC has added since its founding was a state flagship school and or an AAU member. So, they're adding these big, good schools that have huge followings. People embase me for this on Twitter, by the way. But one of the schools that I said the SEC, if they needed to expand, they need somebody else, they'd be better off with West Virginia than North Carolina. Right? Because like people watch West Virginia more. Just a personal opinion. But yeah, those people love it. And so, in that regard, it's a strength for the SEC. And the Big Ten, by the way, is the same. The Big Ten is the same. Like, people from Iowa love Iowa. People from Wisconsin are Badger fans. They are. And so when you have that as a strength, it's really good. And you think some schools lose that, right? Stanford has lost that. Stanford used to fill 80,000 people or 60,000 people into the 85,000 seat Stanford Stadium, and now they put maybe 20,000 into their half the size field. And so when you lose that sense of place, I think let's be honest, Stanford is a better TV product. Stanford does fine on TV. People watch Stanford on TV. They don't watch Stanford live.
Going back to your comments about the Pac-12 network, first of all, do you remember when the Pac-12 network launched? What was it, about 2012?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The thing about the Pac-12 network is, like, if McKinsey were to design a great strategy, it would be the Pac-12 network. Like, it was the perfect strategy, so poorly executed as far as the distribution piece went. But I'll tell you my other theory on the Pac-12 network, and I truly believe this. And I would love to do like a case study, like break down the numbers on this. This would be fascinating. But like, one of the problems with the Pac-12 network is that the decade of the Pac-12 network, it planned in 2010, launched in 2012, I think launched in 2012, was that so many of the great Pac-12 brands stunk in the decade of the Pac-12 network, right? USC was bad. UCLA was awful. Cal was bad. Washington, they had made one playoff run, but other than that, they were pretty bad. Arizona State was awful. Arizona was atrocious. Colorado was appalling. The teams were so bad that, like, you didn't have to watch the net. Nobody wanted to see a bad Cal and a bad Colorado or a bad ASU play a bad UCLA. And so as a result, there was no demand to see those games. If you went back and just not the 2010s, but the 2000s, or the 90s or the 80s or the 70s or the 60s. And the games that were on the Pac-12 network, people would have wanted to see. But the problem is the 2010s were the worst decade ever for the Pac-12. You'd have to go back to the 1950s in the Pacific Coast Conference for when they had bad teams like they had in the 2010s. And so, nobody wanted to see bad Cal versus bad Colorado. And as a result, I think that's what killed them more than anything. Just people didn't want to see the games.
No, it's a great point. Tony, you mentioned the production value of the Pac-12. So from 2012 up until just a couple of years ago, I never saw the Pac-12. Didn't have it, like most people didn't have it. I got it about 2 years ago. The first media days, I watched the football media days. I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, this is a first-rate production. The talent's good. The storylines, well-produced, well executed from a production standpoint, clean, and very impressed. The other thing I wanted to note about the Pac-12 network that I find humorous is that, of course, once the last softball pitch or baseball pitch is thrown, that's going to be the end of the Pac-12, of course. Well, we're in the second semester, so I understand technically with them they're showing everyone's football spring games on the Pac-12 network, where I would love to see these broadcasts. I have not seen them. Maybe I can catch them, the replays, the recorded replays on YouTube, because just what approach are they taking to these broadcasts of all these schools that will not be playing in a Pac-12 next year is just fast. It just fascinates me in terms of, what type of approach they're taking, and that they wanted to hold on to at least the rights to those spring games to the bitter end.
Well, part of it is contractually, right? They're required to provide that stuff to the network. Like they're required to provide, or not to the cable providers. So like that was one of the catches I'm told anyway, was that, they couldn't just like hand it off, right? Because like they have to provide the Pac-12 network through, June 30th or whenever it ends. And so the programming is, kind of what they have to do. I will say their approach to it has been interesting because it's been a very chin up, almost like a very sort of like perfect waspy, like we will provide this coverage. We will honor our teams. We'll honor our history, not talk smack, but also they don't cover their own drama at all. Right. Like there was no coverage of the Pac-12 lawsuit on the Pac-12 network. Probably should have had that. No coverage of the realignment on the Pac-12 network. It's a little bit of like almost like an authoritarian, sort of channel philosophy, like, speak no evil, but also trying to be kind of above it and go out with grace, or, however much grace they can have. Now I understand how whatever's going to happen with Oregon State and Wazoo, they're keeping because of course they got the lease on the property, they got the equipment, they got the stuff. So they're going to keep the stuff going to do whatever is going to happen for Oregon State and Washington State, at least for the short term. But it's not going to be, I don't think, on main TV. I think that all their contracts end with, Comcast and Spectrum and whoever else they're with.
Tony, as of course this plays out specifically in the ACC, and that appears to be the next shoe that needs to drop in all this realignment configuration for the future, whether the model that most of us, I believe, have thought was shaping up in regards to the big boys kicking out the Wake Forests and the Boston colleges of the world and trimming to an ultimate 48 or whatever that number lands on, or whether what we've seen here recently in the media with the 70+10 configuration of a
that's
70.
That's a turnkey business development thing. No, that's like, do you know turnkey? Mark, you probably know. You must know turnkey. Yeah, for those guys who are watching who don't know, turnkey is an executive search firm that specializes in placing like high level athletic department officials, especially ADs, like ADs, coaches, stuff like that. It's really like probably like the best of the executive search firms. And so this whole thing, I think that this Super League thing, they've put together this sort of like, they're calling it a think tank group. I forget what they call it, College Football Tomorrow, something like that. It's a way for Turnkey, the HR firm, to network with their clients, right? They're schmoozing with the people that they want to hire them to replace their ADs and replace their football coaches and all that. So it's not a guys. For those of you guys who don't know this is not like a constitutional convention. This is like when Deloitte hosts a conference for CFOs. The goal is just that you're going to schmooze with Deloitte. So keep that in mind, and also keep in mind that the Big Ten and the SEC are not part of this. So, but there's a really good thing about the whole thing that nobody's talking about, which is there's a lot of hesitation outside the Big Ten and the SEC, particularly on stuff like revenue share and athletes as employees and all that. And what I think that this Super League group is doing that's really important is they are helping sort of move everybody that's sort of lagging behind. They're trying to bring them to the front of the mindset of like, this is where the industry is going. You need to come on board. And that hasn't really gotten enough attention. I think it's something really important that they're doing apparently pretty effectively.
Joey Foster of the West Virginia channel here at the Voice of College Football. Joey,
Mountaineers.
great to see you.
Hey, I got a question for Tony. Tony, I was disappointed. I was thoroughly disappointed. You don't have a Longhorn network on here. Where did they rank?
I have no data on the Longhorn network. I think that they don't they just flow gold directly to Texas's vaults?
They broadcast one game, Joey. I'm going to stick up for UT. I think they're contractually obligated to broadcast one game, and it's usually Louisiana Monroe.
Yeah, and then they have 10 viewers for it probably. So, yeah, just curious, Tony, the other chart that you had up a while ago, those numbers didn't include 2020. You went from 2016
No,
to
these are just 23 and 24. Or I'm sorry, 22 and 23. There's a typo in the one.
I'm sorry, the other chart, one with all the teams on it and where they were.
2016.
Right, 2016, yeah. That one right there.
Yeah. So when we look at TV data, I usually take out, when you guys see my charts on TV data, I usually take out 2020 because a lot of teams didn't play a full season.
Right.
So your data gets screwy. So I took 2020 out of both of them, again, because we didn't want to count wins that we weren't counting views of. So, and this one, 2020 is taken out.
Okay. Well, I would have thought viewership would have probably been up more in 2020 since somebody could go to the games. But with
viewership keeps rising each year. So it got better in 21. It got better in 22. It got better in 23. So college football overall viewership keeps going up.
Good. All right.
No, I'm sure there's I don't know. Let's pick at Texas A&M. They were good in the COVID year and they've been bad since. So, I'm sure the Aggie fans will complain that they want to see the COVID year numbers. But in general, the 2020 numbers, again, they're screwed. Like there wasn't a Michigan Ohio State game. The Pac-12 teams play. And the other thing that happened then is when there weren't games to fill the inventory, right? Remember we talked about the importance of channel. So to fill these Big Ten games that weren't happening, Fox put other people. And so when you use the 2020 data, sometimes it gets a little screwy because now that game that shouldn't have been the Kansas State Houston game. It should have been Michigan Ohio State or whatever
right.
It was.
Now the ESPN Plus numbers, did you even consider those at all, or are those even available?
Not in anything I have. They're really small.
Yeah, I would think they'd be really small. I was wondering if maybe you just rolled them in with ESPNU or ESPN2 or something.
No, I'm told they're I don't have the streaming numbers, but I'm told they are minuscule.
Yeah,
now I'll tell you actually. So according to my media friends, so I mean I don't have ESPN's internal numbers on this, but supposedly, believe it or not, I'm told one of the most profitable, or bang for the buck, profitability wise, whatever, of ESPN Plus is actually the Ivy League. Because not a lot of people want to watch Princeton versus Harvard, but the people that do are really, really attractive advertising targets.
Yeah.
I don't know, Rolex and Mercedes want to advertise to that more than they want to advertise to Iowa State.
Right.
Or whoever.
Okay, I'll get out of here. I just wanted to call in because I wanted to just clarify those numbers and see if you included those or not, and also about the 2020 deal. So Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.
Go Mountaineers.
Appreciate you being here. Everybody check out Joey's work on the West Virginia channel. Joey, when are you guys live each week?
So we go live Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday every week. We have some new shows starting this Monday night at 7:00. Wednesday night, Mountaineer Locker Room at 7:00. Thursday night, we cover all the Big 12 on Thursday nights on the West Virginia channel. So Big 12 Thursday, and that's at 7:00. And Friday night is Mountaineers Live. And we talk nothing but Mountaineer sports all the way around there. So Mountaineer football all the way around. So
awesome.
You guys tune in with us. And we got a Tuesday show that's hopefully going to come up here in the next few weeks. But right now, we do not have a Tuesday show, but we do post videos on Tuesday. So, all right, guys.
Thanks, Joey.
You, Mark. Thanks, guys.
Good to see you soon.
To your point, Tony, about 2020, and it's bringing back memories just of the networks just trying to scramble to put anything on. In week 1, the highest rated game in 2020 was SMU and Texas State because nobody else was playing. The first few weeks of the season after that, the ACC dominated because the SEC had yet to start playing. The Big Ten wasn't playing. And the ACC just ruled for the first few weeks, and a bunch of group of 5 teams, because again,
they were games.
A while for anybody to play. Yeah,
and so you do get that now. So some of the times, so I'll vary. When you guys see when I do TV data, when I put it out there on Twitter, or we talk about it on the shows or whatever, there are some times that I think it's interesting to look at the 2020 data. But in general, I usually take it out, just because, like I said, it gets goofy because you're counting things that you shouldn't necessarily count. But sometimes it does provide some interesting things, or you want to look at cumulative, because one of the interesting things, if you do think about eyeball, like when we're trying to think about comparisons, I tend to take it out. When we want to think about scale and eyeballs, those were games people watched. And so, in those cases, I tend to leave it in. But if we're trying to do something comparative, then I take it out, just because a lot of teams didn't play those games. But one of the things, the TV database that we work with, it goes back to 2016. There's some reasons it goes back to 2016. I know there's some teams that were good in 2014, and they think it's a conspiracy against them, and it's not. It has to do with comparability and some other issues. But once you start really getting in, okay, we're looking at 7 years of data, 8 years of data. One data point doesn't really move the needle, and you really get some good perspective.
All right, folks, we do appreciate you showing up for our TV ratings breakdown with Tony. And Tony, thank you so much. This is always a learning experience for me. I love these kind of breakdowns. I just can eat it up. The TV ratings merges 2 of my great loves, being college football, and I've been in the TV business for 30 some years. Not that I'm in it now, but I was since 1991. And for some reason, Tony, I don't know what bug I caught, even as a little kid, I would look at TV ratings when I was like 9 years old. I would be fascinated. How many people watch this and how many people watch that? And how many people watch the Oscars? Oh, that killed. I got into that immediately.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I mean, I enjoy it, and I like, seeing like the predictability of it. And by the way, I'll tell you guys something really interesting to me. Just one last thing. I know you got to run, but believe it or not, game time is not a big factor in viewership. Not nearly. I mean, it is a little bit, but not nearly as impactful as stuff like the ranks of the teams and the channel that it's on. So there's a sort of a belief that viewing time matters, and it really doesn't very much. And that really ticks me off because I spent so much time in the database coding different options and all that to try to find the link, that of time mattering, and it never did. So,
and
so
Fox,
it was one of my failed hypotheses.
And Fox making the move it did in, I believe, 2017 to move its biggest game to noon each week pretty much backs up what you're saying right there.
Yeah, the people, the time itself didn't really matter. And now, I mean, there's some chicken or the egg, right? They don't put Michigan State, or they don't put, Michigan, Ohio State at, midnight on the Hawaii slot. But so you get a little bit of chicken or the egg. But I mean, again, you take a look at that ridiculous Colorado State game that 10 million people watched at 2:00 in the morning. People will watch if they want to watch.
This is off the beaten path, but it both saddens me, but it also fascinates me, and it's outside the realm of college football. But we saw, now this is not the part that saddens me, so people don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. It's tremendous, the surge in women's college basketball. I have no issue with that. And then we saw it, of course, with Caitlin Clark. She has a lot to do with it. The Iowa basketball team, South Carolina's got a dynasty. There's a number of factors. Caitlin Clark.
Kim Mulkey is the ultimate villain. She's like Cruella de Vil as a person. It's great.
And so the numbers have just taken off. It's amazing. So I did a little digging, really found the numbers that I really knew off the top of my head, but just verified them. And as a longtime baseball fan, who no longer is really into the game, but I still just believe it to be the most beautiful sport. And
I love it.
For 40 years plus, I was just a baseball nut. Tony, in 1980, the average World Series game drew 44 million people. That number is now down to 9 million people. And if somebody would have said then, or if somebody would have said 10 to 15 years ago that a women's college basketball game would draw twice as many people as a World Series game, people would have thought you were crazy. I would have.
I will say, and I hope that it continues. I personally really do. I'm curious to see how it continues. We've had a wonderful perfect storm. I think there probably will be a little regression to the mean.
Yeah.
The question is how much, and I'm not qualified really to predict that. But yeah, you had Caitlin Clark surging, you had Kim Mulkey, truly sort of being in a good way, being the villain of the game. Dawn Staley's the powerhouse coach, kind of the Nick Saban of women's college basketball. Colorado, actually, I guess that would be more Gino, probably, I guess. UConn. So you had this convergence of stuff, and 2 years kind of good growth. I hope it continues for the sake of women's basketball. One thing I will say, though, if you think about going back to 19, back then people had like 4 channels or 5 channels or whatever. So there was a lot less to watch, and so people just kind of watched what was there. And, now there's, I don't know, you can watch FBI reruns at all hours of the night. So there's more options for people to watch. By the way, any baseball fans,
and this,
if you're a big baseball fan, my uncle just started a new podcast called The Terry Collins Show. It's really fun. He even broke down his infamous ejection that was hot mic'd. So if you're a baseball fan, that was pretty funny. He and Tom Halley and the umpire that that he was arguing with did a whole big breakdown of it the other day. It was pretty fun.
I will listen to that. That's very cool.
You'll get a kick out of it. They're really funny when they break it down.
That's great stuff. All right, folks. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. So next up for us, we've got a Friday with the transfer portal update at 3 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. We've got the Big Ten Live show at 7. We've got Tim and Matt with the USC call-in show at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So your Friday is with us again. And what am I forgetting?
Fight on, Trojans.
Well, I'm also forgetting our... No. I'm not forgetting, because I've scheduled this for Monday through Thursday, our little wake up college football show in the mornings. But I'm giving myself a 3-day weekend, so I don't have to get up to be here at 8 a.m. on Friday. So join us on Monday for that. Tony, is there anything that people need to know about what you've got going on?
No, you guys, I love interacting with you guys. So anything you need, reach out. You can ping me on, Twitter or wherever, and love chatting with you guys as always.
Tony, thank you so much for your time and expertise. We appreciate it, sir.
Fight on, Mark. We'll see you soon.